My name's Jill Thompson, and I'm an associate partner at Education Elements, and so excited to be here with all of you to talk about recharging yourself and your teams for really this end of the year. And I'm excited to be here with Megan.
Hi, everybody. It is nice to see so many of you joining us this afternoon. I'm Megan Campion. I'm an associate partner with Education Elements as well, and very excited about this topic. We've been thinking about this a lot and talking about it a lot. And I'm also really grateful to see everybody utilizing the chat. So as we go through the webinar, if you've got questions or comments or anything, please go ahead and keep using that chat. It's nice to be able to feel like we're interacting with people. I mean, it's fun to talk to Jill too, but it's good to know that you all are paying attention.
Absolutely. I love seeing people in the state I am of South Carolina, and I'm seeing some people are where you are, Megan, in DC area, but then we're also seeing people that are also in different countries. So loving that we have people from coast to coast and around the world joining us today so we can gain some new ideas. All right. Oh, and a North Carolina person. I'm on the border, so I kind of say Carolinas.
Claims them both.
I do claim them both. So our objectives for today is we're going to understand why we need to take care of ourselves and others to continue building a classroom in school culture and explore strategies for re-energizing yourself and your team. We're going to go through this through emotions, mindsets, and behavior. And I'm going to give a shout out to Fort Mill, South Carolina, because that is where I am. So you truly understand why I'm claiming both North Carolina and South Carolina. So we are in the same city and on the same webinar. Excellent.
So we want to start by acknowledging what a year it has been. I guess a few months ago, I had the opportunity to talk with a district leader in Ohio, and we were talking about the experience of leading through the sort of the past year. And I guess at that time it was probably like, nearly a year. So we're now it's been about what, 15 months, 14 months since the shutdown. And it's been quite something. And this leader talked to me about, he said, we're all trained, school leaders and district leaders, we're all trained to navigate a crisis. But what we've been navigating now is a chronic crisis with several acute crises interspersed throughout. And that's when we started thinking about that. And I mean, I guess we're all living through it. So we all are aware, but this has been a very long-term set of challenges that that school leaders and teachers and really the whole world has been going through it. But I think that there are certain populations that have felt the pressure more acutely, and I think that educators are among them. So we've had this long extended COVID experience, and then through that, there's also been all of these other things, some related to COVID, some not, that have been popping up that have been their own like crisis moments. So it's been pretty exhausting for school leaders, for teachers, for families that have been going through this. And this timeline just has like, a bunch of pretty depressing images that show you all the things that have been going on in all of our lives for the past 15 months. And one of the things that we know is like in an acute crisis, like if we have like something really terrifying happens, our body's going to go into like fight or flight. Like we're going to have like a really natural reaction that's going to actually probably keep us safe, because we're either going to, fight the thing that's threatening us, or we're going to run away from it. Or I think I can't remember the third F, fight, flight, or we're going to play dead.
Yeah.
Freeze. Yes. Freeze. Thank you. Or flee, or yeah. So fight, flight, or freeze. And all of those things are intended to keep us safe during like a moment of really, really acute danger. Over time, though, this like staying in that state of high anxiety or high, I guess it's like you're just all keyed up and you're ready to do something. That over time isn't really good for our survival. It actually leads to burnout, like the experience of feeling like you're always anxious and irritable, and you're easily angered or frustrated. You can feel really overwhelmed, and you get into this whole cycle of burnout. You go from that like stress response into the burnout cycle. And if we can't get out of that burnout, that stress cycle, and we get into the burnout cycle, it's not a really good space to be in, either when you're doing things that you're trying to do at work, when you're working with children. It's just an overall pretty unpleasant place. And many people are kind of there right now. It's been a year that has really been perfectly engineered for sort of maximum burnout. As school and district leaders, the thing that you all have to grapple with is thinking about how can you support all of the people that you need to be supporting through this very long, very difficult time. And now we are at the point where we can be reflecting on, we're beginning to see what's happening in terms of teachers' interest in returning next year. We're hearing more about like anxiety about churn in different leadership positions in school districts. So we want to be thinking about how we can kind of get reoriented and re-energized, acknowledging that this has been really exhausting, but thinking about what can we do to end the year strong and begin to find that sort of sense of like hope and renewal, and that sense of the sense of meaning behind what you're doing, and a real alignment with like why you got into it in the first place, and sort of finding that joy again. So we're kind of at the, hopefully we are at a place where we can begin to see that things might be looking different soon. And we want to be thinking about like, we've got the light at the end of the tunnel, we can see it. What can we do now to make sure that we can get people back to a place where they can see it too, and they can sort of get excited about what's coming next? And to structure how we're thinking about this, Jill and I were both really inspired by an article that we read that was actually written before COVID, but it had such a great title. It was called Leading Through Whitewater. And we thought that's kind of what this is. It's like whenever you think you're okay, there's like another big wave that comes along. And when we were referring to this, it had kind of three categories of things to think about as you're addressing leadership through times like these. And the first is emotions, the second is mindsets, and the third is behaviors. So that's how we're going to be talking about the things we'll be talking about today. And we'll start off with thinking about how you can recognize and work with the emotions of the people that you're working with and leading.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So with those emotions, it's important to really think about what is culture and where are you in your culture within your school. And when we think about culture, we really think about how express goals and your values and beliefs, and guides the activities that you do through shared assumptions and group norms. And that's important to anchor ourselves into this, because a lot of people's culture fluctuates. I think a lot of it about it as a time of the leaders need to be like an orchestra conductor. Sometimes you're going to need a little bit more drums. Sometimes you're going to need a little bit more flutes, and you're going to need to bring in different pieces to be able to meet the different needs of all your stakeholders, and really think about what is going on. And so we're going to give you some tips and tricks of how you can do that, and thinking about the journey that your teachers or your leaders or your students are going to be kind of from here over the next 3 months. And this is something that you can do again and again, because you always want to come back to your culture to really think about where it is at. You've probably heard this quote many times: culture eats strategy for breakfast. And really, this implies that the culture of your school always determines the success, regardless of how effective your strategy may be. And that's important to remember, because when Peter said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, he pointed out the human factor and really that importance of it in any school, company, organization. So no matter how detailed and solid your strategy is, if the people executing it don't nurture the appropriate culture, then your projects will fail. And what's going to happen with that is so is your culture. And so we want to make sure that we're being very strategic, but also thinking about that human factor. And so we'll be bringing that up a lot. And one of the ways to think about human factor is that there's eight cultural styles. And understanding your school's culture requires determining where it falls along these two dimensions and really thinking about the independence versus the interdependence and the sustainability versus flexibility. And like I said earlier, when you're thinking about that conductor, you're going to need a little bit more purpose and caring in some parts of the school year, and you're going to need more results and authority in other parts of the year. And it's a balancing act of how you want to really conduct your school and help as you're thinking about culture. And so one way to really think about doing this is through what we call a journey map. And journey maps are really used often and for customers to really have a visual graphic interpretation of a story that they want to tell. It helps them think about the relationship of any, organization or service line, and like why we're telling this story. So oftentimes this time of year right now, when I'm working with principals or superintendents, I'm saying, all right, what does it now look like from April till June, really that close out of school? What are these next few months going to look like? And how can we put that into a journey map? And really giving them a place to examine the social and emotional needs of the staff is by completing a journey map. So to give you an example first outside of education, because it's always good to get outside of education examples, and then we'll give you one inside, is really thinking of IKEA. If you haven't been to IKEA, they target their customers for adults in their 20s and or young couples. They really know their values and they know their core structure. And they think about that. And when you're going through IKEA, they purposely put in different moments and different portions to really help you think about it being this one-stop shop, because they think about the full journey from beginning to end. And what that looks like emotional wise, when you're thinking about the social emotional piece, is how it's going to affect a person. And so somebody's going to be really satisfied when they have a great quality product, but when they have to do that self-service or you have to stand in those lines for pick up stock, you are going to be more in the like not so good portion. But what you can do is then have these what we call peak moments that we're going to go into to bring that up, because it's a peak moment when you leave and you get to have ice cream and hot dogs and like all this like junk food, right? After those bad moments, you forget about them because now you have this peak moment. And that's something that we need to be intentional and purposeful in doing when we're thinking about school journeys. And so here's an example of a journey map for a school. Again, thinking about the end of the year, this is a one from a principal's from a principal's perspective, where they're thinking about April, May, and June, where you're returning from spring break. People are interested and excited. They've hopefully been recharged. But then you also have that testing training. And that testing training is usually pretty boring. It's the same old compliance ritual that you need to do. And then you have right after that, usually that teacher appreciation work. So you're back up into a high, excited moment, but then it goes back down because now you actually have the state testing and you have, usually at least a week of state testing. And then usually it's more than that with retakes and everything that's going on. Then you're excited, you're closing out the year, you're ending on a high note with your students that, they've made these great accomplishments. And then you're like interested because you're going into some summer break. And I put it in that interested because many districts across the country, and I should say states across the country, also have summer school this year or doing summer school. So they might be going very short break and going into that summer school. So it brings us to think about how can we bring in that power of moments to help these pitfalls, what we call them, where it's bored or frustration that you're having. How can we bring those up and help teachers? And so a book, if you haven't read it, is The Power of Moments by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And we're going to take just a little snippet from that when they talk about powerful moments and what that really looks like. And they use this great example about Disney. And so say Megan and I, we texted you every hour while you're at Disney. You are going to rate your Disney experiences different if you're scaling 1 to 10. And your 1 being this is absolutely lousy, 10, this is terrific, best day of my life, right? And so it's going to be different at different points. But if you look at this, you're 5, it's a small world, you've been waiting in line, it's the morning time, so you're still a little bit excited because you have a great day ahead of yourself. But then you have like 10, you've just ridden Space Mountain and you're so excited. The kids are begging to go back on that ride. Then around, lunchtime, you have to think about, those expensive lunches, that $20 hamburger that you are purchasing. So, you're thinking about that. So you're slightly going to go down. And then you're thinking about waiting in line. It's, you're in Florida, it's 96 degrees. Your kids are now like, I just want to be on the ride. They're, hanging on you. So it's going to be like a 3. But then at the end of the day, you're going to be leaving the park. Your kids have the Mickey Mouse ears. You watched the parade and you think, oh, that everybody just looks so cute and happy. You're giving that really an 8. So if you take that and average those all out over time, you're seeing that the average is really just a good day. It's just like that. Okay, it's a 6.5 if you average that all out. But let's say we text you again a few weeks later and we ask you to rate the overall Disney experience that you had. Psychologists predict you're going to be higher, and it is true. You actually rate it higher because you think about the peak moments and you think about those really great times that you had. And there's really specifically those 2 moments that stand out: riding Space Mountain and buying the Mickey Mouse ears and watching the parade. Those actually outweigh everything else because you start not thinking about those, but you think about those peak moments. And those are the moments we really want to create when we're thinking about schools and the school journeys. And so to think about it this way, we need to think about it through their framework, which is called EPIC. And that's where you're really taking the lifting the everyday to make it, just that little bit better. You're having that pride, you're recognizing people, you have moments of achievement, you're being insightful, really thinking about those aha moments and those epiphanies that you have. And then connection, you're deepening your ties with other people and you're having those connections that you can think about. So if we go back to that example where we had the principal think about what the journey was for teachers from April to really the end of the year, you think about how can I bring in these peak moments? And so here down where it was testing training, maybe we can gamify testing training. So it's not the same old way we've always done it, but how can we add that little bit extra fun to it where we're bringing people together, still doing what we have to do, all the state mandates, but we're gamifying and leveling it up. Then when you're thinking about state testing, maybe you can have a themed week where you're doing something for the teachers and the staff each week. Maybe it's doing a coffee cart on Monday or having a tailgate on Friday where you're providing them lunch. Or maybe it's just those, little moments that you can give them throughout the week that make that week just a little bit better, because we always know it's really stressful during that state testing time. And then at the end, sharing your gratitude at the end of the year. I know being an administrator, sometimes it's just the teachers hand in their keys. But what a much more powerful moment if when they hand in their keys for the end of the year, you give them a note. And that note really shows your gratification for them for what they've done this school year. Extra points when you really personalize it to something they did specifically in their classroom. So you're bringing that connection and you're leaving on that good moment. So then those other moments start to kind of dissipate because you're remembering those peak moments and those high pieces. So I'm going to stop and pause. I love that people love the Heath brothers. I always have great stuff. They've written lots of great books. But in the chat, I would love to hear from you all. What is one moment you can add in a powerful moment for your staff in the next month. So what's one way that you can add that powerful moment for your staff in the next month as you're starting to think about it, as you're thinking? And as you're thinking, oh, there we go. As you're thinking, I'm wondering, Megan, is there any powerful moments that you've been hearing from principals or superintendents of things that they're thinking about? But I'm going to say a 2020 thing of you're on mute.
You'd think this was my first Zoom call. I've got two things I want to say. One, I'm actually going to drop in the Heath Brothers resource for like 7 days of defining moments. It's just a little PDF that we found on their website that has ways you can plan for these sort of defining moments. And I also wanted to share that a district that I work with, they just decided they were having their students come on campus for the first time for testing. For the remote students, it was the first time they were coming on campus for testing. And they had the teachers who were teaching those students remotely, they did a sort of a little, I don't know, like a little, what do you call that? Like a little, not a gauntlet, because that sounds bad, but like sort of an applause, like a reception line with those teachers sort of cheering the kids on who were coming. And it was really exciting for the teachers to get to see the kids in person. And it was super exciting for the kids to get to see the teachers in person. So instead of the memory of the day being like, oh, I had to go take a test and sit in the classroom, it was like, I got to see Miss, whomever. And so that was a real small gesture, but like huge moment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Seeing a lot of great ones coming in, from writing personal cards, bringing snacks, sending, notes in the mail. And so everybody loves getting good mail. So that's a great one. Loving that. And just bringing parents and students together to review the year with all the different moments, which is also another great way. Just ending with treats. Loving all these different things. Oh yes, I love putting little Easter eggs or clues around the school. That's fun for them to find and then get little gift cards and prizes. Love that. April and Brandy, loving seeing, a sticker that talks about some kind of positive mantra or image, right? It's all those little things that are just really elevating it and bringing that power of moments. But if you don't sit down and do that like journey to plan what those moments are, then it becomes, just another thing. So we want to be purposeful. And thank you, Amanda, for sharing the Kudo board that you can do virtual notes and memories of gratitude. I love that. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Megan as she talks now about mindsets.
Yeah, so that is the mindsets are kind of the second category of things that we want to be thinking about. And when we're thinking about mindsets, what we're kind of orienting toward is thinking about resilience and having a resilient mindset. So this is sort of toward recognizing like what's gone on during the year and doing what you can to support the development of resilience in yourself and in your teams and in your students as well. There's a article that we drew this from that I will actually link and put in the chat here. And the first responder mindset. So this is all about resilience being a question of how you think rather than who you are. So none of us are born resilient. We all get resilient because we go through some things and then we think about it in the right way. So I am going to do this and not multitasking that well, but there we go. So you have the article now if you'd like to read it. And when we are thinking about this kind of first responder mindset, the challenge is to reframe the way you're thinking about the experience that you're going through. Or reframe the way, pretty much like how you're experiencing something and finding the thing in it that you can learn from and that you can become better because of. So the example or the kind of the thinking behind this is it's a question of putting yourself back in control when you feel out of control, finding the thing that you do have some control over. And turns out, more often than not, given the right amount of effort and the right practices, you do have control over your thoughts and the way that you think of things. So when something goes wrong and you're feeling like the world is kind of, coming for you, like you have the ability to shift the way that you're thinking about that from that initial feeling of being out of control and being sort of, I don't know, subject to the whims of things that are that seem to be out to get you. Um, the psychiatrist who explained this to us may not be familiar to all of us, but there is somebody who is probably familiar to most of us that also has offered some guidance on how we can shift our thinking. And I don't know if you all read this article. Turns out this was from O Magazine, like nearly 10 years ago. But I remember this this kind of sentence stem from Oprah as being a really empowering thing and a really empowering way of thinking through things. That if you quiet yourself down and you start thinking about the things that you know for certain, because lots of times the things that upset us the most are the things that we don't really know for certain. We think something bad, we think somebody meant to say something rude to us, but what we know for certain is I just heard these particular words and this is how I took them. So as you are sort of planning for this and thinking about how you can support your students, your team, and yourself, thinking through first, like, what do you know for sure? When you can identify the things that you know for sure about the circumstance, the people, it can calm your mind. And as Oprah says, it enables you to get quiet enough that you can sort of listen to your own intuition. And that state of mind, that being like much calmer, is a much better space to be planning for what comes next and figuring out how to deal with the situation that you're in. So this gets into the framework we're about to share with you, gets into kind of the dabbles in the clinical description of what we were just talking about shifting the way that you're thinking, and that's cognitive restructuring. So that is identifying the things, noticing in your mind when you're hearing things that seem, when you're thinking things that seem like maybe a little irrational or a little unnecessarily negative, and isolating them and then flipping it. So it's burning sort of a new mental, it's burning a new pathway in your brain, and it's developing sort of a new mental habit for the way you're going to process things. So this can help in so many ways. It can help you combat workplace stress. It can help improve your mood. It can help combat personal stress that you're going through. And a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about in this mindset and behaviors portion, a lot of the things that we learned from the book Burnout by the Nagoski sisters. It's Emily and Amelia, and the book just came out, I think maybe last fall. And to me, it was just so perfectly timed for what everybody is going through. And it has some really interesting ideas and framing for how you can deal with burnout. So this cognitive restructuring, again, we're going to get into like a particular tactic here. And this is a way to address it. So our framing here is we're thinking about processing some stressful event, something that is worrying you. And the first thing you want to do is calm down. And I don't like those two words next to each other, actually, because I don't think that ever actually works if you tell somebody to calm down. But basically, you want to find your own place of calm. And deep breathing and meditation can help. If you are not a meditator, really just deep breathing is a huge step in the right direction. Then you want to name the emotion that you're feeling, and be very specific. You're not just feeling bad, you're feeling very worried and a little frustrated. So get as specific as you can. And then say out loud the internal thought, your worst case scenario, the thing that is just looping and looping in your head. And then create an alternative thought and say that. And this actually comes from a book called Mind Over Mood by Christine Pedesky. So there are other things in this book that could be helpful too, but this framework comes from that book, and I want to make sure I don't leave anybody with the impression that I'm trying to get away with saying I made it up. If we, thank you, Jill. Jill's copying the name of the book for you to have in the chat. When we, we're gonna go to the next slide and look at sort of a real life situation and walk you through this experience. So let's say you are upset about something that happened at work. You were going to do a presentation for the board or something, and you ran it by your coworkers first and they didn't like it. So maybe the first thing you're going to do is not be upset. Just get yourself in a space where you can take the feedback, and recognize that you're feeling really embarrassed and sad about what you heard, because they didn't like what you did. And now you're feeling like, oh my gosh, they finally figured it out that I don't belong here. And I don't know if everybody's got imposter syndrome, but I feel like everybody may have had some glancing acquaintance with it at some point. Then recognizing that that's the thought that's going through your head, and then saying, you know what, but most of the work that I do is very good. And this was feedback that I got that I can change it before I need to present it to the board or present it to the person who I was getting feedback to present to. So shifting it and taking it as a more constructive step is just one small example. And hopefully this framework may be helpful for you working with people who you may have one-on-one conversations with, if you're talking to a colleague or somebody on your team or a student about things that are upsetting them. Hopefully this framework could help. Then we're going to get from shifting our mindsets. Now we're thinking about the behaviors that you may be able to employ with the people that you're working with to help support them here in this last leg of the year. So the first thing that we want to call out is the importance of recognizing the struggle and recognizing that this has been really difficult for many people for a whole bunch of reasons. I think I've been in a lot of meetings recently where people are saying, you know, we always have to assume that everybody's going through something. And it's a very safe assumption most of the time, but especially right now. So when we're thinking about recognizing the struggle, we think about, like, if you're getting to the point where you're pretty close to feeling burned out, or you are feeling burned out, the things that you're going to be feeling, that you or people on your team may be feeling, are that sort of emotional exhaustion. And this is very common for people who are in caretaking roles and professions, and educators are caretakers. And educators, I mean, when you're a teacher, you take on all of the feelings of the students in your classroom. When you're an administrator, you take on all of the feelings of the people that you're working with in your building. And when you're a district leader, you're taking on all the feelings of all the people who are working in the buildings. So there is a lot to absorb when you're in a caretaking profession. And sometimes that can leave you with that sort of secondary trauma and real exhaustion. That depersonalization may come next. That's when you just start detaching a little bit, and you can't really access your empathy for what people are going through, because you're thinking, like, I can't listen to this anymore. I can't take on one more problem today. And then also you have this sort of decreasing sense of accomplishment, that you are working so hard and no matter what you're doing, it's not going to make a difference. So why would you keep working this hard? And you couldn't possibly work any harder. You may be feeling some of these, you may be feeling all of these, maybe you just know of people who are feeling like this. But I invite you to just take a moment and think about which, if any of these, are resonating with you. And then we're going to start talking about the things that you can do for yourself and for your teams to help kind of work your way through this. So this list of things that we're about to share, this does come directly from the burnout book that that Jill shared the information on. And these are practices, these are behaviors you can put into place to kind of get your body through that stress cycle and cue your body that it's safe and it's okay to like get back to normal. So first thing you can do is sweat. So I think a lot of people mentioned exercise as a component of how they recharge. And turns out you're right. That is one of the key ways we all recharge. And we all can cue our body that like, okay, this was a stressful thing, but now it's over. And so now you can relax. So this is the most efficient and reliable way to complete the stress cycle. If you can engage in something that's challenging, something that's going to make you sweat, get your heart rate up, and then you let it return to normal, your brain's going to go like, oh, okay, all right, I get it now. If you want to think about how you can do this with a group, with people that you work with people that you support, if you can do it in person, better yet, maybe now you've got most people vaccinated, it's getting nice and warm out, maybe you can do things outside. If you're still limited to remote experiences with the people that you work with, there's a lot of online exercise classes that have become available. YouTube has 1 million of them and they're free. You can just schedule a time to go through it with some colleagues. This is something that we do at Education Elements. We've been remote since last March. And when we used to travel, we used to do things like, oh, we'll go to an exercise class together, or who wants to go for a walk? And now we have scheduled many shared exercise experiences where we all just flip on our Zoom and we'll do something together. Or those of us who have Pelotons will get on the Peloton together. So it's a communal thing, and it offers that same sort of completion of the stress cycle that everybody needs so much right now. Our second tactic here that we're going to share is just breathe. Like those deep, slow breaths. I think the breathing is like the easiest thing that you could recommend to a person. And it's also one of the most beneficial. Those deep, slow breaths can just get your body completely relaxed. And if you do things like, if you add in a couple little meditation cues, like remove your tongue from the roof of your mouth and relax your shoulders and take a deep breath, it does the same thing. It's your body cueing your brain that you're okay now. You can do this yourself. You can also lead a group doing it, either in person or we also have had a colleague of ours who's led us in that kind of practice for 15 minutes over lunch, just sort of a guided meditation. And if you're not a comfortable meditator, again, there are lots of free recordings that you can get of people just speaking in very soothing tones and kind of walking you through that experience that can get you in a much more centered state. Next one is laugh. That like big belly laugh that like when your eyes are watering and you're gasping for breath, that is probably to me one of the more joyful ways to cue your body that you're safe again. That it's all the same cues that you get from the other two, but then it's also that sort of bonding thing where you can just like have that shared memory of laughing that hard with somebody. There are lots of apps that you can use for games and pretty funny games online if you haven't found Quiplash during or House Party during quarantine. check it out. You can still do it in not quarantine, and they're still pretty fun. You can also do in-person things. The thing with a big belly laugh is like it'll land for some, it won't for others. One of the other tips in the burnout book is really just a pleasant social interaction where you're smiling to somebody. That can also really help. So even if you can't hit the belly laugh zone, at least you can get to that really pleasant social interaction where you're just touched that somebody's trying to make you laugh that hard. And then our final trick here for this set of behaviors is creating. Singing, dancing, drawing, painting, writing, cooking, baking, crocheting. A lot of you had those in your how you recharge because it does recharge you. That creative process allows you to process emotions. You're processing them indirectly, but you're processing them. And that's what's going to return your brain to a more proactive, centered state. If you're thinking about how you could do this with a group, you could do things like we've done this a few times. We do a lot of facilitation and we do a lot of speaking in front of people. So we've all had some training in that sort of visual facilitation, sketchnoting. And that's not complicated and it's fun and it is really creative. You get really into it and it does put you in a different state of mind at the end of it. So you could do something like that, lead a meeting and have everybody do sketchnoting for their notes. You could ask people about creative hobbies that they'd like to share and teach to people, or just make it really clear that you value that, that sort of creative outlet as a way to restore equilibrium and to sort of maintain the health of your team. The second part here is really having to do with the ability of your team to support each other and thinking about psychological safety and the things that will go and build psychological safety. A lot of the practices that I just mentioned will serve the same purpose, but this is slightly different framing. And again, I'm going to cite our sources here on psychological safety. If you have not read anything by Amy Edmondson and you're curious, just look her up and watch her YouTube. She has a TED Talk on YouTube that's amazing. She's a researcher in Harvard. She has done a lot of work on psychological safety, and her research started by looking at error rates in hospitals. And she thought she was going to find out that hospitals that reported fewer mistakes had fewer fatalities. What she actually found was that hospital teams that reported more mistakes had fewer fatalities because they were able to learn together. So for networked learning and that supportive sense of belonging, the foundational piece is psychological safety. And this is her definition, that belief that no one's going to get punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. You will know whether or not you are in an environment that has psychological safety. If you look at these sort of indicators on the right. So because nobody wakes up, this is Amy Edmondson says this in her TED Talk, nobody wakes up and gets ready to go to work thinking, I want to look ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, and negative today. And if you're worried that you're going to be perceived that way, then you're going to check some of the ways that you're going to participate at work. So if you don't want to look ignorant and you're really worried about it, you're not going to ask any questions. If you don't want to look incompetent, you will never admit a mistake. If you don't want to look intrusive, you might not offer your ideas. And if you don't want to be perceived as negative, you're not going to challenge the status quo. And all of that not doing is an indicator that maybe there's some work to be done. There's some things you could do to enhance psychological safety on your teams. So the next piece here, this is when we're thinking about resilient teams and their ability to, ooh, sorry, that's my phone screaming at me. When we're thinking about resilient teams and their ability to get effective work done, we're quite inspired by it's Project Aristotle. This was a study that was done by Google. And their question was, what makes an effective team? And they found all of these things do. 1 through 5, these are the 5 things that effective teams need, but foundational to all of them is that sense of psychological safety. These are the questions you would ask yourself if you're thinking about whether or not your teams are psychologically safe. And then finally, we have a few ideas of things that you could do to sort of increase that psychological safety and sense of connection on your teams. So starting meetings with a check-in and ending with a checkout, which is, we started our meeting today with a check-in. And we do that with every meeting. It enables you to sort of get a read on the people that you're meeting with and understand where they are. It also enables them to connect with each other as people. Channeling outside passions into service for the team. So that's something that hits on a couple things. One, it's like, you feel recognized if somebody comes and asks you to share something that you're really interested in. And it also gives you a clear sense of contribution, which is a really great thing to have if you felt like you've been traumatized or you have felt like things are out of control. For you to be able to take control of something and contribute it back to the team is a really good thing. So our example here, this was from, oh gosh, last spring, I guess. When we shut down, we all started doing little lessons. We took turns doing lessons for all the kids who were home from school. And since most of us are former teachers, we were feeling like we were really doing something, even though we were in our homes. Then finally, modeling vulnerability. As a leader in your organization, for you to be able to model vulnerability is going to have such an enormous impact on the people that are on your teams. And our example here, I think this is when our CEO was learning to jump rope. So he filmed himself jumping rope, which didn't look great the first time he did it. And then he came back a month later, having practiced every day, and shared his progress. And it was inspiring. A lot of people felt like they could share, themselves doing things that were risky and that they weren't good at yet. So these are 3 things you could try for that sort of step toward more psychological safety. And I think with that, go ahead, Jill.
Oh, I was going to say with that, we'll do like a closeout. We would love to hear from you. What is one takeaway you had from today's webinar? Really thinking about, is it thinking about emotions? Were you thinking about those powerful moments in that journey map? Are you thinking more about mindset, or wanting to shift behaviors and maybe some of the things that you were seeing? Thank you so much for joining us as you're checking out. We'd love to hear you. Love seeing that people want to check out Amy Embison's things, being intentional about peak moments to end the year. Excellent. Yeah. And throughout next year. Absolutely. All great ways. Shifting behaviors by checking in and out and fostering that psychological safety. Thank you. Powerful moments and mindsets and shifting behaviors. Excellent. Well, we thank you all for joining us as you are heading out. We appreciate it, and stay connected with us. We're both on Twitter, and follow Education Elements as well.
I'm loving reading these. Thank you all for checking out. It's great to see what feels useful. So thank you for sharing this.
I love taking risks, modeling vulnerability, journaling. These are all great ideas.
Yes, we will be sending a recording, I think, of everybody who registered to, I'm sorry, not of. We will be sending a recording to everybody who registered for this webinar. That'll come in a follow-up email. And I think a PDF of the slides may come too.
Yeah, and it will also be on our website as well after, but you guys will get it all first since you joined. Yep, the links will all be there as well.
I'm so glad you got a new book wish list.
Megan, we do this often. We should probably like side hustle for Amazon, all the books we say.
Well, next job.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. I'm glad you enjoyed the resources.